Yeah, when we think of climate change, definitely we think of so negative, devastation, floods, cyclone, and definitely climate change impact is not the same all over the world. Although it's a global phenomena, no doubt about it. But when we think of taking action, especially adaptation, adjusting to the impacts of climate change, we need to think locally. And then comes the concept called community-based adaptation. So what do we mean by community-based adaptation? Essentially, community-based adaptation is a community-led process, and it based on community's priority, the knowledge they have, the needs they have, and of course the capacity they have. But it has to focus on empowering people, the way they plan, the way they cope with climate change impacts. So if we think a bit deeper into community-based adaptation, or popularly known as CBA, we can see quite a few aspects into it, or we can call them dimensions. We need to think of, since people's livelihood, their lives based on local resources, so resource management is a very big aspect of CBA. Then comes the ecosystem integrity, because most of the people, they depend their lives and livelihood on natural resources. So if the biodiversity and ecosystems are not doing okay, adaptation will fail. Then comes capacity building, which is a very crucial aspect of CBA, and that may lead into livelihood diversification as well. And sometimes we bring in the financial aspect of CBA, like microfinance and insurance. And finally, of course, not all the communities can take care of it, but infrastructure is a big part of community-based adaptation. Now, if we look into the other aspects of community-based adaptation, let us give you some examples. I will give you some examples focusing on what changes are happening on the ground, what impact those climate change or climate variabilities are bringing in on the people's life, and what are the actions could be taken in terms of community-based adaptation. As you can see that sea level rise, storm surges, all create challenges on the coastal region, like salinity intrusion. But water is such an important part of people's lives. So how to take care of those challenges related to water scarcity? One is desalinizing the water that we have on the ground, under the ground, or we can harvest the rainwater coming from above. The other things are small infrastructure. In many society, the house and the shelters that people have at the community level are not strong enough, because those climate vulnerable people, they are also quite poor. So making their houses stronger so that those can withstand natural calamities like cyclones, tidal surge, all sort of things. But at the same time, fishing going vessel, those have to be strong enough so that those can withstand unruly, very turbulent sea. The other cases are food security. We know that climate change impact on our agriculture and food system is huge, immense. There is no doubt about it. But what are the major issues? Well, salinity is one. Similarly, lack of water, like drought, can be quite a challenge. So, discovering or inventing salt tolerant and drought tolerant crops, combining two different resources such as rice and fish culture, making them integrated farming, as well as harvesting water not from the top, but using solar irrigation system, all can secure the food for climate vulnerable people through community-based adaptation. Finally, how to make the ecosystem stronger under changing climate. Well, the forests that we have, we can protect them. The wetland that we have, we can protect them as well. But we need to restore those ecosystems as well, because we have already damaged them to some extent. But I should mention that in some cases, we need to create new ecosystems like coastal afforestation, which is a fantastic way of bringing people together and create green belt along the coast. So if we look into different phases, as I conclude with community-based adaptation, we can see that there are certain contexts we need to focus on: the knowledge aspect of it, the livelihood solution aspect of it, the governance aspect of it. But we should also remember different processes actually work together and create this, make the community-based adaptation effective. It could be the root causes analysis, it could be capacity building, participatory solutions, integrated approach, and of course, monitoring evaluation. All will come together and create the outcome we are all looking for. Because after all, we are looking for climate resilient community, and it has to be aligned with disaster risk reduction as well as sustainable development goal that we want to achieve over the next few years. When we talk about adaptation, there are different concepts we have been framing over the last couple of decades. We talk about community-based adaptation, but over the last few years, we have been hearing about a new concept, locally led adaptation. It may seem like similar that we are talking about community on the one hand, but locally entities on the other hand. But let me explain locally led adaptation by going through some different aspects of adaptation. For example, at least we can do to make adaptation work by involving the community to implement the adaptation actions. That is known as locally implemented adaptation. So this is one side of the spectrum. And the other side of the spectrum is locally led adaptation. It means all the planning, all the decision making, what resources should be used, who will be using it, everything should be led, managed, owned by the community. That's how we get the new concept called locally led adaptation. As you can see in this diagram, it shows all the spectrum, how locally implemented, locally managed, locally planned, locally owned can come together and reach to the peak locally led adaptation. There is no agreed definition of locally led adaptation, but as the term locally is there, we have to think of not from the community perspective, but the administrative perspective. So the idea is we have to think of the lowest administrative unit where everything will be done. So when we say everything will be done, it means the local community, their organizations, the federations, local government institutions, even local level stakeholders. Everybody should come together at that particular unit, and they will be identifying the adaptation actions. They will be prioritizing them. They will be planning them. They will be implementing, monitoring, evaluating, as well as learning from the whole experience. That's how locally led adaptation works. But it doesn't mean that locally led adaptation will be working in silo, excluding everybody external. It is not like that. They have to work and interact with the national, regional government, the private sector, civil society organizations, as well as donor as much as needed, so that the local entity can lead the adaptation process. One beauty of locally led adaptation is when it was first conceptualized, the lead organizations who were framing this particular concept actually identified 8 different principles, which is known as the LLA principles. The first principle is all about decision making. So decision making will be happening at the local administrative unit we are actually discussing. That's the first principle. So it is called devolving the decision making at an appropriate level. The second principle is all about equity. It means that all the stakeholders are there. Everybody should come together. It has to be very, very inclusive. We can call it the principle of inclusion. The third principle is all about funding, because finance is so crucial to take action on the ground, and it has to be flexible as well as predictable. The fourth principle is about maintaining institutional legacy, because sometimes we see some certain entities, they actually work, but when the work is finished, they just move away. No, it shouldn't be happening when we are talking about locally led adaptation. So that institutional legacy should be there. Now, coming to the fifth LLA principle, it is about knowledge. We need to understand what are the risks we are talking about, what are the uncertainties we are actually handling. So we can call it a kind of a knowledge principle, principle 5. Coming to principle 6, it is about programming as well as learning from implementing the program. So flexibility in programming and learning is very important, and principle 6 will ensure that. Principle 7 is about the key elements of governance: transparency and accountability. These are so important while maintaining all other principles. And finally, LLA cannot end unless we have collaboration, as I mentioned, not only among the internal stakeholders, but also external stakeholders. So collaboration, collaborative action, and formulate the principle 8. So if we look into the examples from all over the world, there are fantastic examples you can see. For example, in Nepal, we see LAPA, which is known quite popularly. The elaboration is local adaptation plans of action. It is such an inclusive process, and Nepal is actually leading on this front. Yakum Emergency Unit of Indonesia, they actually make women group included in the planning process. If we look into the Paonca Fund from Nicaragua, it is fantastically led by indigenous community, that this particular fund, so that indigenous community, they can take action on the ground in terms of traditional knowledge, well-being, rights, self-reliance, all sort of things. If we go to the think of principle 7, which is the transparency and accountability, there are so many different funding systems, and their projects are all over the world. Let me take an example from Kenya. The County Climate Change Fund, it ensures that how the fund will be allocated at the local level. Similarly, Slum Dwellers International, they work with slums all over the world, and donor reporting is a key aspect of that. Finally, the last principle, principle 8, which talks about collaborative action and investment. In Zimbabwe, we get a fantastic example of Gungano Urban Poor Fund. In Bangladesh, Climate Bridge Fund, and MGN REGS of India. They are all fantastic examples of how urban poor, climate-induced migrants, as well as poor people who are needing employment guarantee are getting what they need on the ground. In that way, by following locally led adaptation principles, LLA, although it's a new concept, could be helping the climate vulnerable community all over the world.